we read a lot of stuff. And it's clear to us that there are some trends, some big differentiations between beginner writers and advanced writers, right? Teresa, you can tell pretty quick when you're reading something, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, you can. In fact, I would say that there are 3 things that advanced writers do. We ready for those? What do you think?
Let's do it. I think one more thing before we jump in here. So we're going to cover 3 different things that we really notice as differentiations between beginners and advanced writers. And this is not meant to make anybody, we're not going to call anybody out by name. It's not meant to make anybody feel bad or anything like that. It's meant to be kind of a self-evaluation. And if you want to improve your skills, because writing is a skill that you can improve, right? These are some concrete things that you can do to push yourself into that next level of awesomeness for your piece.
I like it.
All right, Teresa,
Okay.
what's the first thing that people can do?
So the first thing is command of the written language. And I know people are like, oh, for crying out loud, I don't care where the comma goes. I put the comma in, I take the comma out.
I
None
just
of
do what
these
my
things.
editor tells me to do with the comma.
Yeah, I don't bloody care. And we're not talking about commas here. We are actually talking about the words that you choose, the variety of your sentences, the variety of your paragraphs. Do your sentences start with the exact same word? I, she.
I'll give you one. In beginner writers, in beginner passages, or sometimes unedited passages, because we can all fall into this habit, you'll see a lot of section or a lot of sentences that will all start with noun, verb, thing. He ran to the park. She saw him there. They played with the dog, right? Like all in a row. Versus a more advanced writer might do something like he ran to the park where
He ran into
yeah, this is hard to do off the top of your head, but he ran into the park absently. I don't know. Now I'm starting with an adverb, which is another controversial take, but you can start, you can start your sentences in different ways and add variety in the length of them too, right? You can also catch yourself falling into all of your sentences are 6 letter or six word sentences all in a row or something like that.
Exactly. And you can also fall into the trap of all your paragraphs are the same size. They're all 3 or 4 sentences. That's a trap I know I fall into very easily, and I have to constantly be aware of it. But you had just actually, Molly had just said a good one where you started a sentence with an adverb and then you winced and you go, that's controversial.
Yeah.
So proper command of the written language will tell you when you can break the rules and start a sentence with an adverb.
Yeah. It's fine to do. It's just maybe not something you want to do all of the time.
Right. And the other thing too, starting your sentence with an adverb might tell us something about this character. So that's the other thing our word choices, why our word choices matter, is that our words tell us who the characters are.
Yeah. I really like what you're talking about here. Like the specificity and your word choice really has a big impact. And one of the things we're trying to dance around here in this topic is this nebulous term called voice in writing. These are the things that give you an author voice. Like how you use the written language, this is your voice. And part of it is the words you choose to use, both in terms of, okay, did someone walk to the park? Did they run to the park? Did they stride? Did they skip? Like each of those words communicate something different, and your specificity is important in communicating, like Teresa said, things about the character and how they're interacting with their world. But there's also specificity in terms of, sometimes we catch ourselves in the world of vagueness, right? So she read a book while eating chips. Okay, that's one option. Or you could say she read Hamlet while eating Cheetos. You've not added any extra words, but now you've told us very interesting things very quickly about this character, right? Are they reading Hamlet for pleasure, or are they in an English class? Like, you start opening up questions and interesting things about your world without having to increase your word count. And that's really
Exactly.
helpful.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, here's a trap beginner writers fall into. They start using the thesaurus. And I'm not saying thesauruses are bad. I constantly use a thesaurus when I'm like, that word doesn't mean what I want it to mean.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the emotion I'm trying to evoke, or that character would never use that word. So
Yep.
thesauruses are your best friend. However, there are 16 billion ways to say smiled. You don't need to vary it. It's okay to say,
Sometimes it's okay.
it's okay to just say they smiled and life is good and move on. You don't need to be like, shoot, I use smile, I do a find and I use the term smiled 200 times in my manuscript. So I need to come up with 200 different words. That means you don't do that. No way.
Maybe if you use the word smile like 3 times in the same paragraph, you might want to consider varying it,
Change it up.
or not saying smile. So like maybe you just need to find a different description in the paragraph, right? Elimination is a form. Elimination is a choice. Let's say it that way. But yeah, it like it's okay to say said, right? He said, she said. That's okay. It's all right.
Please don't vary that. It's okay. In modern language now, it is okay to use the word said. It's you can change it to evoke emotion. Don't change it just because you don't want to use the word said.
Yep. And our last thing in this one that we want to emphasize that has to do with command of the written language is that your characters sound different, both in dialogue and if you have point of view changes. This is really difficult to do, but part of it comes down to the word choice you're using, how they talk, that kind of thing. It's difficult. Don't get us wrong. It's really difficult, but it's something advanced writers do well.
Exactly. Exactly.
Are
Ready
we
to move
ready?
on to number
I
2?
think so. And number 2, easier said than done, number 2, and that is advanced writers evoke emotion, right? I don't know if you've ever read a book or a story or someone's manuscript and you read it and things happened and you were like, cool, stuff happened, but you never feel anything as the reader. You sit there and you're like, I don't, somebody died and I didn't care, right? They got married, they kissed, I didn't care. You didn't feel anything in there. And that's hard to pinpoint sometimes why, but we've got a couple things. One, having deep, purposeful characters who care about things, who have flaws, who feel 3D and connected to the world around them, right, Teresa?
Yeah, that is super, super important. And a lot of this goes into emotions. We human beings are emotion driven. How many movies have we watched where we're like, dumbass, why are you running into the barn? I would never run into the barn. Don't you know there's a serial killer in the barn? Why are you running into the barn, you dumbass?
Just get in your car and leave. Call 911.
But the reason they're doing that, in theory, is fear makes us do stupid things. That character is very afraid. They see a barn, they see safety, they run in where the serial killer is rather than getting into their car and calling 911. There is purpose and emotion behind that. Emotion is driving that character forward. It's dumb and cliched, because that was the only thing I could think of. But
yeah, but it's valid. But if we as the reader don't feel like the character is in fear, then we don't feel like we're scared either.
Right. Yeah. And what we are doing with writing is evoking emotion. We are using the written word to try to feel something.
Yeah.
Joy, sadness, fear, elation, anger, something. Because at the end
And
of the day, that's what drives us.
this is one, we'll touch a little bit on a different aspect of this later. This is one where I want to emphasize, like, these are powerful emotions, but as a writer, it's not very powerful to just say that, Bobby was scared, so he ran to the barn, right? What is much more effective is bringing in the sensation of fear, and not just like, Bobby looked scared. Well, what does that look like? Like, describe what that actually looks like. Is he shivering? Is he shaking? Is he crying? But also, like, beyond that just visual, bringing in more of the senses. And I know you might have heard bringing in the five senses, but it's not just bringing in the five senses to describe things just for the heck of it. It is because you were trying to draw the reader in, you're trying to elicit emotion from the reader and make them feel like they are part of the scene. So, okay, it's Christmas time and you walk in a room and there's a Christmas tree, that's great, but that doesn't like evoke emotion. But if it's there and you can smell the gingerbread cookies that remind you of the cookies your grandmother used to make and she passed away last year, and you look at the tree and it's hanging with the childhood ornaments that you made and that you gave to her every year as you were growing up, right? And then the lights are sparkling and, oh, you realize that someone brought out her favorite nativity scene and set it up exactly the way that she would have set it up, but in the wrong place, and all those kinds of things. Even they put on Christmas music and put on, your grandma's favorite song. Now suddenly you're describing a scene, sure, but you're also describing like a deeper emotion. You're
Exactly.
bringing the reader into the story and making them care.
Yeah. And you can do the opposite too, with you can describe a Christmas scene and make it have a spooky vibe. The
Oh,
lights
sure.
are out. The tree is sparkling, but the lights are out of sync with each other. And oh my gosh, is there something hiding behind the tree in the shadows? And the boards are creaking as you walk on them. And again, we're describing the same scene. It's Christmas time, walk into the house, but we're using different words to evoke different emotions. That's what we're talking about here.
Now, before we get on to our final, and the thing that we think that is most important and most distinctive between advanced writers and beginner writers, we'd ask you, if you like this video, go ahead and give it a like. If you are interested in seeing more videos from us, hit the subscribe button. We are a small channel, but this is something we love doing and we love supporting and we love building communities. Teresa, what else can they do? How else can they find us?
They can go to our Discord. On our Discord, Semi-Sages of the Pages, you can help us build the most positive author community on Discord. Come hang out with us. It's beautiful people on there. Everybody's so supportive and so helpful with our Race to Rejections, with sprints, with writing advice, all of the good stuff.
We
All
hope
right,
to see you there. Give us our final tip.
All right, final tip. The difference between advanced writers and beginner writers. Everything in that story has purpose. So what does that mean, Molly?
It means intentionality.
Ooh.
So, when you're writing a description, there's a reason that description is there, right? If you're telling us something that the character is doing, that's important for us to know for some reason. There's all sorts of, different things, like the things that you choose to write in your story are there for a reason. That's the first layer of this, right? If you're familiar with the trope Chekhov's gun, there's kind of an opposite one to it, which is so in Chekhov's gun, right? If you see a gun, then that gun has to be used later on in the scene. You expect it to come back and further your plot or interact with the character in some way. But sometimes you see the opposite of that in writing, where they describe something and you as the reader are conditioned to be like, okay, that'll be important later. And then it never is, and it never comes back. So avoiding things like that.
Exactly. Exactly. Another big thing too is making sure that the plot is acting on your character. So something happens to your characters that is important to the plots, and then the characters make a decision based on what happened to them, and that decision drives the plot forward.
I think another way of saying that is that the characters have agency.
Mhm.
So you can see this, there is a common plot, or a very common plot, where someone is kidnapped. And that can be really difficult for writers, especially beginner writers, because it seems like characters have no control, right? They are kidnapped, or they are in prison, they are confined in some way. And it might be hard for the reader to conceive of, like, okay, well, I've now trapped them. They don't have any choices. They can't make choices. They can't go outside. They can't do these things because I've confined them. And then it can make it feel like your character doesn't have agency or isn't doing things. There's still things you can do, right? Like the Count of Monte Cristo is a great example of how you can have a character who's in prison and still has agency, right? Like there are many examples. Every decision then is important, right? You show decisions, and those decisions are intentional. What the character decides to do is important and tells you about who they are.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I think that gets into our next one, which I talked about. This is part of intentionality. This is a controversial one. This is finding the right balance between show versus tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is, what advanced writers understand and what they do well is they understand that showing has a place in your manuscript, in your piece, and telling also has a place. They both have a place, and figuring out the right balance and when to use each one, that's a hallmark of an advanced writer.
Yeah, exactly. I think showing versus telling, first of all, has gotten misunderstood. And second of all, it's gotten taken so far out of context to where people have these ginormous manuscripts. And when you go, ooh, that's a lot. They say, well, I was trying to show, not tell. And it's like, well, yeah, but it's okay to say that they ate a sandwich and moved on with their life. You don't need to have them going to the fridge, making the sandwich, making those choices, unless it is integral to the plots.
Yeah.
Unless those choices matter. And the fact that they skipped on the peanut butter this one time evokes an emotion. They skipped the peanut butter because it reminded them of their mom, and their mom just died. Great. That's a great time to show that sandwich, making that sandwich.
Yeah.
But if they're just hungry and they're making a sandwich, please, we don't need to see the making
Right.
of it. It's okay.
Right. There's three options, right? There's show, tell, don't include.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's why most people don't include bathroom scenes, right? You don't need that. You don't need it. Right. Telling might be really useful for like Teresa, like you said, like there are logistical things that you have to tell the reader, but they're not an emotional tie-in. They're just like, I need to get this information across, and I need to get it fast, and I need to do it without the reader misunderstanding what I'm telling them. Like, hey, the tournament is on Friday night.
Yeah,
Great.
we're good. We're good.
Great. And then I think showing is really powerful when you do need those emotions, right? Going back to number 2, right? Instead of telling that I walked into the room and it was Christmas and I felt sad because it was my first Christmas without my grandmother. Okay, but remember how, and it was really off the top of my head, so you have to go and edit it and all that kind of stuff. But remember how I described it before, right? I never said, oh, it was the first Christmas after my grandmother died and I felt sad. But through the description, through the showing, you get a deeper understanding of that emotion and it comes out more.
Exactly. Exactly.
What's the next thing with intentionality?
Next thing is understanding genre and reader expectations. Now, that doesn't mean you can't genre bend. If you want to figure out a way to do fairies in space with a murder mystery, by all means, go for it. Heck, yes, that sounds absolutely amazing. But that's not gonna be a literary piece. That's gonna be a very tongue-in-cheek satire, lots of fun antics piece. And the reader, if your publisher or you, if you're an independent author, the reader will know that when they pick up the book, they look at the cover and it's a quirky, weird, fun cover.
Yep.
And they read
And
the
they read the back
description.
blurb. Yep.
Yep, exactly. And they know what they're getting into. They are not looking for a beautiful, written, deep dive into deep, evocative emotions. They are looking for, I'm going to probably giggle a little bit.
Fun.
And, have some escapism and read this on the beach. And it's going to be an amazing day.
Yeah. And a lot of, we've harped on it before, and I know a lot of people don't think it's important, but it surprisingly is the word count.
Mhm.
I know it's not fun to talk about sometimes, but if you tell someone that you wrote a contemporary romance and it's a quirky, fun contemporary romance, and then you hand them a book that is 150,000 words, there might not be want to read that. That might not meet what they want. Like the word count, you can break the rules in different ways, but understanding what the expectations are allows you to then have intentionality in when you break the rules and how you break the rules and how you set up the reader to love your story.
Exactly. And then our next point on intentionality is a cohesive plots. So, and this is where sometimes you have to kill your darlings. You have to kill that fun, amazing scene that made you laugh out loud, but doesn't advance the plots. And that's when you have to delete it. Everything should be moving the plot forward,
Everything should have a purpose.
Yes. Yes, you're right. Yes. Everything should be having a purpose. And if you read it, or your beta readers or your editor looks at it and goes, this is really cool, but you said this basically already, or this already basically happened to the character, something's got to go.
Yeah, or you need to rewrite, or it didn't happen the way you wanted it to. It's whatever that means.
You disagree with your editor and you go, screw this. I want it in there anyway.
I want it in there anyway. Yeah.
I liked it. Okay, great. Just understand and be intentional about it.
Exactly. And not only with the other thing I want to say about cohesiveness is like, it feels like the same book between the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
Right? You didn't start as a contemporary romance, and then by the end, it's
fairies in space.
Unless you're intentional and the blend to get there makes sense, right? If it makes sense, then it might feel cohesive, right? But we've all picked up a book. There's one I'm thinking about in my head, but I don't want to name names of like a real book. But I remember reading the first chapter and I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be great. I understand we're going to have a little bit of paranormal. We're going to have this, we're going to have that. And then that was not what the book was about. Like it was that first prologue was like it belonged to a different story. And there wasn't a cohesive message. There wasn't a cohesive theme.
I know what book you're talking about, which I won't name. Yep. I do know what book you're talking about.
Yeah, you do. Right. There's not like a like I didn't feel like the author had a vision of what their book was supposed to be doing.
And then they tried to like link back to it.
Like a half-hearted attempt.
And the epilogue. And I was like, what the hell is this?
Right.
Anyways, we're not naming names.
All right. And our final thing under here about everything having a purpose, intentionality behind what you're doing, right? This is something we see with beginner writers, is sometimes beginner writers write the first idea they have. And I don't necessarily just mean that in terms of the first like idea for a book, although sometimes, but they write the first when their character runs into a problem, they get stuck, they're in prison, they're whatever. The author solves it by using the first thing that comes to mind. And oftentimes the first thing that comes to mind is a trope or a cliche.
Mhm.
And sometimes those tropes or cliches are valuable and should be used, but again, intentionality,
Right.
right? You want your book to stand out in some ways and to be unique and to give the reader something that they're like, whoa, I've never, they've never solved the problem that way, or they're, that's new. I've not read it that way. You don't want them to pick up your book and, they read it and they're like, oh, I've read 10 other books that start in this way. I've read 10 other books that have it where I'm not gonna list a thing in case I don't want to make anybody feel bad, right? But we tend to fall into the easiest thing or the thing that comes to mind first. But the thing that comes to mind first probably comes to mind first because it's already been done. Not all the time, but sometimes.
Yeah, there's a caveat to this. And I've said this before, there are no new ideas. So don't stress yourself out about trying to come up with something that no one's ever done before. Somebody has done it before, and that's okay. For example, right now I'm taking a fairy tale retellings class. It's absolutely amazing. Fairy tales have been done over and over and over and over, but there is so much value in understanding that genre and rewriting fairy tales. And you can say it's been done before. Cinderella's been done 600 billion times. Yes, heck, it has been done, but we managed to pull new
things.
layers out of it every single time we redo it. So don't worry about redoing Cinderella. That's okay. Just be intentional about it and study the fairy tale model.
Yeah.
If you're going to redo a fairy tale.
Many things that you do are valid, right? There's all these rules that people have about writing, show versus or show don't tell, do this, do that, don't start with a dream, don't have a like there's all these
Don't have
rules.
an adverb. Yeah.
Yeah. All these, don't break grammar, whatever the rules are. The rules like are meant to be broken, but they're meant to be broken in intentional ways.
Exactly.
So you as an advanced writer, as long as you have intentionality about what you're doing, you're using your tropes as like a weapon, as you're wielding it through your book in clever and fun ways, great, keep the tropes. If you're doing things because you mean to do them,
exactly,
awesome, great, and do that. It's the intentionality. It's the intentionality, and that's what matters.
Exactly. And with that, before we sign out, that means you also need to accept feedback. And so if somebody tells you that's a cliche, don't shut down. Own it. Be like, yeah, it is a cliche. I love it. I want to use it.
Yeah, that's very valid. If someone calls you out and says that's a cliche, you have two options. Well, you have three options. You can just ignore them, or you can change. You could say, oh, that is a cliche and I didn't mean to do that, and change it. Or you can say, thank you, I really appreciate your feedback, and then continue with your cliche because you love it and you want to keep it in there.
Yeah, because it's your story. It's your emotion. Have fun with it. Break the rules. Just understand them first.
And on that note, what are you still doing here?
Go right.
Go right.